As I gaze up at the high autumn sky, I take each piece of laundry, smooth out the wrinkles, and hang it on the hanger.
Kate.
Hearing my husband Bob call out to me, I turn around. Fidgeting nervously, he offers me a small box.
Thank you for everything. For our 30th wedding anniversary, I got you this.
The small box is wrapped in pale pink wrapping paper with a red ribbon tied around it. As I take the small box, which fits in the palm of my hand, my heart fills with joy, and I can't help but smile. Thank you. I'm so happy. Excitedly, I begin to untie the ribbon. But the moment I open the box, my mind goes blank. I couldn't believe what was inside. Without thinking, I rushed out of the house still wearing my sandals.
Wait, Kate, where are you going?
Ignoring Bob's call to stop, I kept running. I couldn't understand his actions and felt utterly betrayed. The joy and emotion I had felt moments earlier were gone, and I had no idea where they had gone. I even began to wish I could get back my past 30 years. As I ran aimlessly, I spotted a small park and sat on a bench to catch my breath. A pleasant breeze passed through, making the fallen leaves in the park twirl and dance. Once I calmed down a bit, I stared at the box in my hands. Then, raising my arm high, I aimed at the trash can. This thing. I wanted to throw away the disgusting object in my hand. My name is Kate Carter, 55 years old. I live with my husband Bob and our son Kenny. Kenny is a student and is currently in the middle of job hunting. This morning, as usual, he rushed out of the house after grabbing just a piece of toast from the table.
I'm going to be late for my interview. I'll be in trouble.
This kind of thing happens all the time, and it seems he still hasn't gotten over his habit of waking up late. As I leisurely watched Kenny from the living room, Bob muttered,
I'm worried if he'll manage in society.
If you can do it, he'll be fine. Bob works at an advertising agency and is now a department head. When we first got married, he used to rush around just like Kenny every morning.
Did I really?
Don't pretend you don't remember. Laughing quietly, I nudged him. You should be heading out soon. If the department head is late, it won't set a good example for his team. Hurriedly, Bob pocketed his smartphone and rushed out the door. As I listened to the soft sound of the front door closing, I resumed washing the dishes. Recently, something seemed off with him. Though he didn't seem to notice or care, I had noticed him using his smartphone a lot more frequently. He brought it to the toilet and bath more often than not in the morning and at night. If it was work-related messages or reading the news, I could understand. But sometimes, he would act as if he were hiding the screen from me.
Don't just peek over my shoulder.
He had even snapped at me and given me a glare. I couldn't understand why he was so upset. After finishing the dishes, I began to get ready to head out as well. I've been working as an administrative staff member at a hospital since Kenny started high school. The hospital is about 5 minutes away by bike, not far from home. My main job is customer service at the reception desk. It was a hectic time when the pandemic hit, but things have settled down now. Among the administrative staff who worked through that time, only Megan, one of my coworkers, remains. She has been my best friend since our school days. It was a coincidence that we ended up working at the same place, but she's been a great source of support. Today, I think I'll vent a little to Megan. As I packed my lunch into my bag, I muttered quietly in the empty living room. During that day's lunch break, Megan and I sat in the break room, eating lunch together, and I shared how Bob had been acting lately. Since we're the same age, it was easy to talk to her, and Megan listened intently, nodding along.
That's so suspicious.
Right? It's been like this for months. Megan continued as she took a bite of her sandwich.
Is there anything else? Like more weekend work or less conversation?
I started picking at my lunch as I tried to recall. Now that you mention it, I wouldn't say I'm particularly chatty at home, but I do share one or two things that happened during the day. Like how the onions were on sale at the store, or how our neighbor gave us some limes. Small things, really, but Bob used to listen attentively and react to every little thing. Lately, though, all I get are cold responses like, well, or, oh, okay. And he's been locking himself in his room right after dinner, sometimes for hours without coming out. At some point, he started coming home late more often and sending messages saying, I don't need dinner.
No way. But I thought Bob loved your cooking. That's hard to believe.
That's right. His proposal was something old-fashioned like, I want you to make me soup every day. That's right. He once told me my cooking was the best in the world. I've always loved cooking, but before we got married, I practiced hard to get even better. Then, just last month, something happened. Maybe it was because of the long overtime, but when he came home, he looked exhausted. Welcome home. You're late. I greeted him, but Bob had a very dark expression.
Yeah, just a little.
That night, I had made grilled zucchini, curry-flavored fried chicken, salad, and some side dishes. It was already late, so Kenny and I had eaten first.
Come on, Dad. Hurry and eat. The fried chicken's really good.
Kenny said, munching away, but Bob only glanced over. It's fresh, so it's delicious, I said, encouraging him. He sighed shortly and sat down at the table. It felt like it had been forever since the three of us were sitting at the dining table together. Bob took a bite of the zucchini, but after just one taste, he suddenly clicked his tongue.
This is awful. I'm done.
Wait, where are you going, Bob? He left his half-eaten plate and stormed into his room, slamming the door behind him. Since that day, he's hardly eaten at home. After telling Megan everything that had happened, she sipped her vegetable juice and frowned.
That's really weird.
Talking to Megan about it made me feel a little lighter that day. If I kept bottling this up, I'd probably explode sooner or later.
If anything else happens, let me know. I'm always here to talk.
I can't thank Megan enough for saying that. Thanks, and don't hesitate to reach out if you ever need anything from me. A few weeks passed after that conversation. Bob's attitude remained as cold as ever. I glanced at the calendar and saw our wedding anniversary was coming up in 2 days. Every year, I go all out and cook a special meal for the occasion, but this time, I was a little scared. What if he doesn't eat it again? What if he just dismisses it as terrible? Or maybe he'll say he's eating out before coming home. All these thoughts swirled around as the day approached. Both Bob and I had the day off, and Kenny was at college. Even though it was just the two of us, Bob spent the entire time glued to his smartphone. Every now and then, he'd stare intently at the screen, as if deep in thought, then quickly tap away. As I glanced at him, I continued carrying out the laundry and hanging it up. The weather was nice today, so it would dry well. As I gazed up at the high autumn sky, I took each piece of laundry, smoothed out the wrinkles, and hung it on the hanger. It's funny how this routine hasn't changed in decades. Checking the weather forecast has become a habit by now, too. Come to think of it, there's a storm approaching. I should hang out the bedding before it arrives. As I was lost in these thoughts, Bob suddenly approached me.
Kate,
Hearing his voice, I turned around. Fidgeting nervously, Bob handed me the small box.
thank you for everything. For our 30th wedding anniversary, I got you this.
The small box was wrapped in pale pink wrapping paper, tied with a red ribbon. As I took the small box, which fit in the palm of my hand, my heart was instantly filled with joy. I couldn't help but smile. For me? You remembered?
Yeah, I've been cold lately because of work, but I'm not dumb enough to forget our anniversary.
He said with a sheepish grin. Thank you. I'm so happy.
Open it. I'm sure you'll love it.
I wondered what could be inside. Excitedly, I began to untie the ribbon. As I carefully removed the wrapping, a white box appeared, and I opened the lid. What? In that instant, my mind went blank. I couldn't believe what was inside. Before I knew it, I had dashed out of the house in my sandals.
Wait, Kate? Where are you going?
Ignoring Bob's call to stop, I kept running. Why, how could this happen? These thoughts swirled in my mind as I ran through the neighborhood. Inside the box were a monogrammed handkerchief and a new cookie from a famous bakery. But for some reason, the handkerchief had the letter R embroidered on it. It wasn't my initial. And as for the new cookie inside, it was a chocolate cookie, generously covered in chocolate. The problem is, I have a cacao allergy and can't eat chocolate. I told Bob about this ages ago. He should know about my allergy. So why would he give me cookies loaded with chocolate? I couldn't understand it. He remembered our anniversary, but forgot about my allergy. How does that happen? The joy I'd felt moments before vanished, replaced by confusion and sadness that made my head spin. This wasn't just about today. Over the past few months, his behavior and words flashed back in my mind. I couldn't take it any longer, so I ran out of the house without thinking. Bob wasn't following me. I was starting to lose trust in him. When I looked up, I saw a small park and sat down on a bench to catch my breath. My heart was pounding like a drum. I took several deep breaths, trying to calm myself down. A pleasant breeze passed through, making the fallen leaves dance in the park. As I started to regain my composure, I stared at the box in my hand. Maybe it was a mistake. I thought about opening it again, but stopped myself. This thing. I raised my arm, ready to throw it away. But I couldn't. Bob's face came to mind. Slowly, I lowered my hand and gazed at the small white box. Then, I suddenly remembered that my phone was in my skirt pocket. With my free hand, I pulled out my phone and unlocked the screen. Megan's face came to mind. Desperate for someone to talk to, I called her, and thankfully, she answered.
Hello, Kate, what's going on?
Megan, I need to talk to you. In a shaky voice, I told her everything that had just happened. My explanation was so scattered, I wasn't even sure what I was saying myself. Still, Megan nodded along, saying, "Yeah, yeah," as she listened. Just like when she listened to me in the break room at work.
I see. That's unforgivable. How could he do such a thing to my Kate?
Megan, on the other end of the phone, was outraged, as if it had happened to her.
Don't worry, I'm here for you. And after what he did, you don't need to stay silent.
What? Before I could ask, "What do you mean?" Megan spoke up.
You hire a private investigator to find out if he's cheating.
A private investigator? But isn't that a bit much?
You're being too soft. Mixing up his wife's initial and giving you chocolate when he knows about your allergy? From a third-party perspective, it's a clear red flag.
She was getting more heated than I was and continued.
I have a former college classmate, Mark Turner. He's a private investigator now and specializes in cases like cheating and infidelity.
I never imagined that there would be a private investigator specializing in infidelity so close to me. It felt like something straight out of a TV drama or movie, and my head spun at the thought. "So what happens if I hire him?" I asked cautiously. Megan answered without hesitation.
You'll find out if your husband is cheating. Plus, you'll probably learn who the other person is.
The other person. Just hearing that made my heart race. Could there really be someone else? It all felt so surreal, like chasing shadows.
Kate, whether or not you hire him is up to you, but I wouldn't recommend spending your days stuck in uncertainty.
She added, "As your best friend." After the phone call, Megan gave me Mark's contact information and the name of his agency, and after much deliberation, I decided to reach out. I needed to know what Bob was hiding. Later that afternoon, once I had calmed down, I returned home, where Bob looked at me with a puzzled expression.
Welcome back. Where were you?
I brushed off the question with a vague reply, acting as if everything was normal, so he wouldn't suspect anything about the private investigator. I still had laundry to hang up. Bob tilted his head, confused, but didn't seem too concerned. No questions like, "Are you sure you're okay?" or "Are you feeling sick?" were none of the usual signs of care.
You looked like you were staring at a bomb or something.
He casually threw out the comment, as if it were nothing. It wasn't easy to keep calm and act normally, knowing I had hired someone to investigate Bob's possible infidelity. But a few days later, I got a call from Mark, and we arranged to meet at a cafe to go over the findings. When he saw me, he gave a slight nod. I didn't feel confident facing this alone, so I had Megan come with me for support.
Hello, I'm Mark Turner. I've compiled the documents regarding Bob Carter for you.
Without much of an introduction, he began spreading out several documents.
To get straight to the point, your husband is having an affair.
He clasped his slender fingers in front of him, wearing a serious expression as he delivered the news. I didn't know what to say, and I simply stared at him, frozen.
We've also identified the other person. This woman here, Rachel Anderson, is a colleague who works under your husband.
He laid out a stack of photos, one by one. There were photos of Rachel meeting Bob in the car and entering restaurants. The most damning was a photo of them leaving a hotel, where Bob's face was clearly visible. Seeing all the evidence laid out in front of me, I felt a pain so intense that it seemed like my chest would burst. My breathing became shallow, and the background noise of the cafe faded away. Megan was sitting next to me, nodding seriously and saying something. But I couldn't hear a word she was saying. Suddenly, Megan reached for one of the photos. It showed Bob and Rachel walking arm in arm into a bakery. The sign outside was from the same famous bakery that sold the cookies Bob had given me. The fact that there were several photos like this suggested they had visited the bakery more than once.
Kate, are you okay? You look pale.
Megan peered in with concern. What kind of expression was I making? Even Mark looked surprised and flustered.
Are you okay? You look really pale.
Confronted with reality, it seemed I had lost color without even realizing it. Well, I'm fine. By the way, I have a question, I said, trying to maintain my composure. About the photo of the two of them entering that pastry shop. Do they visit there often? Mark nodded.
Yes, it seems that Rachel really likes the pastries from this place.
Bob had gone out of his way to buy pastries from this shop for Rachel. Is this what it means to be at a loss for words due to shock? As I stared at the photo, I suddenly recalled the handkerchief. The R embroidered on it was Rachel's initial. In other words, that light pink box was a gift prepared not for me, but for Rachel. It must have been for her. I murmured in astonishment, and both Megan and Mark looked puzzled. After talking for a while longer, we left the shop. Mark bowed lightly, just as he had when he arrived, and went off in the opposite direction from Megan and me. As I walked alongside Megan, I recalled the past 30 years. When I met Bob, when we started dating, when he proposed, when our child was born. Each moment was a glorious memory. But now, it all felt like worthless trash, leaving me utterly empty. I want those 30 years back. Thinking about what my time with him had all meant made me sad. Just as I felt tears welling up, a voice suddenly called out to me.
Mom,
Looking up, there was Kenny.
I just finished my lecture, and I'm on my way home now. Is something wrong?
As people bustled by, I stood frozen, staring at him. Should I reveal the truth inside my bag? As I hesitated, Megan said,
Since we're all together, why don't we grab a bite to eat?
This was Kenny's first time meeting Megan, but he seemed to sense the awkward atmosphere and replied accordingly.
I'll go.
I entered a nearby diner, hesitating as I pulled out that document from my bag. Kenny, listen carefully. With that, I revealed everything I had just learned. He was clearly shocked, but there was also a look of understanding on his face.
Well, Dad has been acting a bit strange lately.
You noticed? When I asked, he nodded slightly.
What are you going to do, Mom? Are you thinking about?
Still looking down, he seemed about to say something. What was likely floating in his mind were the words, divorce. However, I was also uncertain if I should take that option. As I struggled to respond, Kenny said,
I plan to support you, Mom, as family.
He stated clearly, despite his worry.
I'm on your side, Kate. No matter what decision you make, that won't change.
Megan also made a fist and struck a fighting pose. No matter what decision I make. Hearing those words, I felt a strong conviction that I had to settle this myself. The day after our meal together, I went to work as usual and stood at the front desk. Maybe because it was changing seasons, it felt like more people were falling ill. Just then, after the morning consultations and billing were done, the number of patients coming in significantly decreased. The front door opened, and a woman appeared. From a distance, I felt like I recognized her. I briefly looked away to prepare a questionnaire for the reception. The woman stood right in front of me at the desk.
Excuse me.
Yes. When I looked up, she quietly unfolded a handkerchief. In that moment, I felt my breath catch. The handkerchief had an K embroidered on it. Now that I thought about it, this familiar face was Rachel. I was taken aback, wondering how she knew about this place. But I decided to pretend not to know her, so as not to give away that I recognized her from the infidelity investigation. Is this your first time at our clinic? I need to get a questionnaire. However, she interrupted me, prefacing with, I know this is rude, but…
Are you the wife of Bob?
The saying goes that eyes can speak louder than words, and I couldn't forget the expression on her face at that moment. Her eyes seemed to reflect a sense of guilt directed towards me. Yes, that's me. I answered hesitantly. Then she suddenly apologized to me.
I'm so sorry.
What? I was taken aback and widened my eyes in surprise. Even the handkerchief with the K initial seemed to hang its head in shame.
I thought.
Just then, other staff members, likely alerted by the commotion, came out. It was certainly inappropriate to discuss personal matters in front of coworkers. I quickly calmed her down before making a promise. I'll see you again after work. The rest of the afternoon, I couldn't stop thinking about Rachel and the handkerchief with the K initial. What could have brought her here? Why did she suddenly apologize? What was she going to say after I thought? I kept glancing at the clock while finishing my work, and when quitting time came, I hurried out of the hospital. There was a bus stop in front of the hospital, and buses connecting the station to the hospital were running. On the bench at the bus stop, Rachel sat quietly with her back straight. I'm sorry for keeping you waiting. I'm Kate, Bob's wife. As I approached and spoke, Rachel jumped slightly, her shoulders trembling.
I apologize for my rudeness earlier. My name is Rachel Anderson.
Her polite tone surprised me deeply. Thinking this woman was having an affair with Bob made me feel defeated in some way. Rachel Anderson, why did you do that earlier?
Well, actually, I've been dating Bob.
She said this while looking away, clearly having difficulty with it.
Recently, he gave me a gift. I was so happy, but when I opened it, it was…
Rachel took out the handkerchief with the K initial from her handbag. It was neatly folded with no wrinkles at all.
I had heard from Bob that he was divorced.
Divorced?
Yes, so I thought he was single.
When did I say I was divorced? I was so shocked that I couldn't close my mouth. According to Rachel, they had started dating a few months ago, and Bob had told her he was divorced by that time. Being a supervisor at work, she never imagined he would lie and trusted him completely. She hadn't seen him wearing a wedding ring, nor did he act like he had a wife and kids. When she was suddenly handed the initialed handkerchief, she was terrified.
I started to think that maybe he wasn't actually divorced.
But how did you know I worked here?
I remembered him mentioning once that his ex-wife used to work here.
His ex-wife's workplace. It hit me hard to realize that I was already just a past woman in his eyes.
My favorite sweet from that pastry shop is chocolate cookies. But the gift he gave me was vanilla cookies, which also struck me as odd.
Oh, the box I received had chocolate cookies in it.
Then does that mean both the handkerchief and cookies were given to the wrong person?
That was highly likely, or Or rather, that was the only explanation. Finally, everything connected. By the way, Rachel had no idea I had a cacao allergy. She looked shocked and repeatedly apologized to me.
I really didn't know.
From her demeanor, it was clear she wasn't trying to cover things up or lie. She truly hadn't realized I existed. I was also shocked to be betrayed in such a way after trusting Bob. We were both victims of him. Rachel, I have a proposal for you. I shared a thought that suddenly came to mind at that moment. A few days after talking with Rachel, I was waiting for Bob to come home while standing in the kitchen. I had already made up my mind. The time when he was supposed to return was getting closer. Finally, I heard the sound of the front door opening with a click.
I'm home.
He entered the living room with a voice as heavy as before, not even trying to hide his exhaustion. I immediately spoke to him. Welcome home. We need to talk.
Sure, but make it quick.
He tossed his business bag down and prepared to listen. I took out the small box given to me on our 30th wedding anniversary. I opened the lid and showed him the handkerchief with the R initial and the chocolate cookies, and I noticed Bob's gaze wandering slightly. Thanks for the other day. By the way, what's this handkerchief? I pointed at it and pressed him for an answer. Bob hesitated for a moment, but then forced a weak smile.
Well, it's just a souvenir.
A souvenir? For what?
Well, of course, it's a gift for our anniversary.
But the initials are wrong. It's neither mine nor yours. I said this with a serious expression, not changing my face at all. Bob chuckled and replied,
That's not true. It's not initials. There's a brand called R.
His excuse was too flimsy. I wanted to ask what kind of brand it was, but if I did, the night would fade away. When I fell silent in disbelief, Bob seemed to think he had convinced me.
Is that enough? I'm tired and want to rest.
I felt irritation at his smile, which seemed confident of victory, and I paused. Wait a minute, I have a guest coming over. When I called, Rachel entered the living room.
Gosh, why are you?
Bob was astonished to see her, and his face turned pale. He stared as if he were seeing a ghost, for Rachel was standing there. She furrowed her brows and stared intently at Bob. In her hand, she held a handkerchief with the K initial. Oh, do you know each other? This is the first time I'm introducing her to you.
No,
Bob, that's not true, right? We've been in love for a long time.
Bob was at a loss for words, mouth agape. In front of him, I revealed more evidence. I spread out the documents of infidelity evidence and several photos I had compiled in a slightly larger envelope. Photos of Rachel happily entering the pastry shop with Bob. Photos of them coming out of a hotel. Photos of them enjoying a meal at a fancy restaurant. I couldn't tell how each photo appeared in his eyes. He could only stare in astonishment. When the last photo fell, he said with a pale face,
What's this?
Hey, what's your relationship with Rachel?
She's, well, just one of my team members at work. The idea that we're in love is a lie.
When I glanced at Rachel, a clear look of displeasure appeared on her face.
These photos are nothing. It was just a work-related meal with a meeting thrown in.
Though he spoke in a flustered manner, it was obvious he was lying. They say when people lie, they cover their mouths with their hands. just like Bob was doing now. Really? Just a meal? I picked one photo and scrutinized it closely. Where in that photo of the two of them laughing at the restaurant could I see them discussing work? It seems like a pretty fun job, doesn't it? I pressed on, keeping my expression unchanged and remaining calm as I confronted Bob. He only continued to sweat while staring at me.
What's going on, Bob?
Rachel quietly stepped closer to him and asked,
I trusted you. So what is this?
Oh, Rachel, that's not it. She's not my ex-wife. She's just a distant relative.
A distant relative? Is this house yours then? Whose house did you come back to?
Anger began to rise on her face gradually. I thought her head might sprout horns. As for Bob, he was left sputtering meaningless words like well and He was probably desperately trying to figure out what to say to convince Rachel and me. But it was futile. He was failing to answer Rachel's rapid-fire questions.
You told me you were divorced. Explain what this is.
Divorced? Well,
He glanced at me and shrugged as if trying to evade the question.
maybe I said it, or maybe I didn't.
He avoided making eye contact with Rachel and turned away from me. He was simply trying to escape from both Rachel and me. I was fed up with his attitude, which showed no sincerity, and my anger reached a boiling point. Losing my patience, I finally spoke firmly for the first time. If you wanted a divorce, you should have just said so. I declared, striking like thunder. I didn't want to say this, but I could no longer bear waiting for his words. Then Bob replied in a clear tone, different from before.
Kate, I don't want a divorce.
He began his speech by saying to listen to him.
People are like the sweets in a pastry shop. There are classic items, and there are new and limited edition treats that come out from time to time.
Both Rachel and I listened quietly, trying hard to understand.
Even classic items and timeless sweets are undeniably appealing.
Bob insisted passionately.
That's why there are long-selling sweets.
I couldn't see where he was going with this, but I urged him to continue. So?
But sometimes you want to try something different, right?
With a smug look, he listed names of cakes and cookies. He must have learned this at that pastry shop, but I couldn't help but wonder where his argument was heading. Rachel seemed to feel the same way and glanced at me. Poor thing, she looked just as confused, with a lot of question marks floating in her mind. Hey, can you skip the names of the sweets and just get to the point? I sighed and told him. Turning toward me, Bob said,
What I mean is, besides you being at home all the time, sometimes I just want to casually hang out with someone different.
Rachel and I were both speechless at his words. What on earth is he saying? He spoke without a hint of embarrassment about something unbelievable, leaving me feeling exasperated. Rachel also directed a cold, disdainful look at him. Meanwhile, Bob wore an expression of bliss, as if he were lost in his own rhetoric. He was completely oblivious to both my gaze and Rachel's. Seeing him in such a painful state, I concluded there was no room for leniency and coldly replied, I'm going to divorce you.
Wait, divorce? Come on, that's a joke.
Do you think I'm joking? Finally, he seemed to grasp the seriousness of my intentions and knelt down, pleading.
Are you serious?
I'm really serious about this. I've been trusting you for 30 years, and I was wrong.
No, Kate, wait. Please reconsider.
Realizing my determination for the first time, he pleaded.
I understand. It's my fault for having another woman, right?
I said nothing. I simply shot him a cold glare.
Please think it over.
Bob shouted.
I'll never do this again. I promise. So please, don't divorce me.
He held my hand, but I'm not going to respond. I was wrong. I'll atone for this for the rest of my life, I swear. As he said this, he sniffled. He looked like he was about to cry. If he was going to cry and apologize, he should have thought of that before doing all this. It was already too late. Besides, Bob was making one big misunderstanding. That's not it. You really don't get it. I crossed my arms and quietly murmured, Do you remember that I have a cocoa allergy?
What?
He looked up at me, startled. I thought you would realize it eventually, but you didn't? I've mentioned it multiple times before.
A cocoa allergy? That's just a preference issue.
I felt something snap inside me. Don't joke around. Back then, you casually said, you looked like you saw a bomb. You were right. I picked up the chocolate cookies and the handkerchief I had on the table. I could no longer suppress my emotions. My insides were boiling with rage. Receiving cookies with cocoa is the same as receiving a time bomb. I wound up and threw the handkerchief at Bob. As I was about to throw the cookies too, Rachel stopped me. Bob stood there, his mouth agape, staring in disbelief at the handkerchief that fluttered in the air.
What? Am I being discarded? Rachel, you're not leaving me, right?
He gazed at Rachel with tear-filled eyes, desperately pleading. But Rachel, contrary to his expectations, shouted,
Don't you dare insult me. I've lost all respect for you, Bob. Stay away from me.
Bob looked as if he had been hit with a blunt object. He then noticed Kenny standing at the entrance to the living room. Kenny had been hiding in the shadows, witnessing everything.
Unbelievable. This traitor.
Bob could only lower his head deeply, feeling defeated as even his own son looked at him coldly. After that, we didn't have any further discussions and got divorced. Bob signed the divorce papers with a gloomy face, as if it were the end of the world. He probably understood the gravity of what he had done in his own way. We ended up selling our home, which is now listed with a real estate agency. Fortunately, there have been a few people interested in viewing it, and one of them is considering a purchase. Bob gathered his belongings and moved out quickly. He said it was painful to face me or Kenny. What a pathetic man who just keeps running away. Go ahead, feel free. I said this as I sent him off. We probably wouldn't meet again. After the divorce, Rachel and I occasionally have lunch together. On sunny afternoons, we have a late lunch and have started asking each other about our recent happenings and about Bob's situation. When the rumors of Bob's affair with Rachel spread, he began to hear whispers from other employees. When Rachel asked him for details, it turned out that he had cheated on her with someone else in the past as well.
I heard that back then. Everyone thought it was unbelievable. They couldn't believe it.
But was it really true? Rachel nodded awkwardly in response to my question. Bob really had been swapping partners while going back and forth between the same workplace and our home. Thinking about that sent a chill down my spine, making me feel genuinely sick. What kind of nerve does he have?
And then he was demoted, so now he's pretty far down the ladder.
If you think about it, it's his own fault, but I really hope he reflects on it. Rachel later quit the same workplace as Bob and started looking for a new jobs. She said it felt disgusting to be in the same space as him. Coincidentally, a position opened up at my workplace in the administration department. A temp worker had left for a new job, and I had just started recruiting. "Why don't you come work with us? You can leave on time, and it's easy to take paid leave." At first, Rachel hesitated, saying she had no experience in medical administration. However, after a few nudges, she warmed up to the idea and began working at the same place. It seems she realized she was surprisingly suited for it. Now, we stand at the front desk as colleagues. Speaking of jobs, Kenny has been doing well in his job search and has received offers from about 3 places. He's still undecided about which company to join, so he's thinking it over. In any case, he will be officially joining the workforce next spring. As a parent, I couldn't be happier that Kenny has grown this much. When I mentioned this to Megan in the break room, she laughed.
Come on, you're secretly a little sad, aren't you?
She teased, and Rachel giggled along.
You were worried about his job hunting the whole time.
Well, of course I'd be worried. That's normal. I blushed a little as I took a bite of the egg sandwiches from my lunch. Still, now that I'm alone at home, I feel like I have too much free time on my hands. Having become single, I'm considering trying something new.
Kate, you're good at cooking. Why not start a class?
A cooking class? I widened my eyes at the unexpected suggestion. I had thought about doing it in the past, but back then, Kenny was still young, and I couldn't open a class. Now, I might be able to give it a shot. Maybe I should give it a try. I set out to pursue my own happiness, stepping forward with a long-held dream.